Welcome back to the World War II True Records channel. In this video, we are diving into the heart of a technological revolution that could have rewritten the history books. We'll witness the moment the most advanced weapon of the 20th century was unveiled, only to be strangled by the ego of the man who needed it most. Before we fly into the eye of the storm, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment below. Did Hitler's tactical blunders actually save the world? Let's find out. April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Vichy-controlled France. The cockpit of the P-38 Lightning is a cramped, vibrating cage of glass and steel. Captain Ronald "Bud" Anderson adjusts his oxygen mask, the taste of rubber and canned air dry on his tongue. Around him, the sky is a brilliant, mocking blue. Below, the patchwork fields of Europe are crawling with the machinery of the Third Reich. Suddenly, your eyes catch a flash of silver. It's not the lumbering shape of a Messerschmitt 109 or the radial engine of a Focke-Wulf. It's moving too fast. It has no propeller. There is no rhythmic thrum of a piston engine, only a high-pitched, banshee-like wail that vibrates through the very air. Before Anderson can even bank his controls, the silver ghost has vanished into the sun, leaving nothing behind but a thin trail of black soot and a stunned silence in the American's headset. He didn't know it yet, but he had just seen the future. And that future had a name: the Messerschmitt Me 262. While Allied pilots were reporting ghost planes that defied the laws of physics, the German High Command was gathered at an airfield in Lechfeld, Bavaria. The air is thick with the smell of scorched kerosene, a scent entirely foreign to a world fueled by high-octane gasoline. Standing on the tarmac, surrounded by his inner circle of sycophants and generals, is Adolf Hitler. He watches, squinting through the glare, as a sleek, shark-like aircraft tears across the sky. It moves at over 540 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, the fastest Allied fighters of the time are struggling to break 400. This isn't just a new plane, it is a predator among prey. General Adolf Galland, the legendary Luftwaffe ace with a cigar perpetually clamped between his teeth, stands next to the Führer. Galland has already flown the prototype. He described it not as flying, but as being pushed by an angel. He knows that with 200 of these jets, the Allied bombing raids that are currently turning German cities into ash could be stopped in a single week. The Me 262 is the silver bullet. It is the miracle Hitler has been praying for. Hitler turns to Willy Messerschmitt, the plane's designer. His eyes are wide, not with the tactical appreciation of a soldier, but with the dark hunger of a man obsessed with vengeance. He doesn't ask about the climb rate. He doesn't ask about the 30mm cannons that could shred a B-17 Flying Fortress in a single pass. Instead, he leans in, his voice, a low, gravelly rasp that chills the air more than the Bavarian wind. He asks a question that makes Galland's heart sink into his boots. Can this aircraft carry bombs? Messerschmitt, eager to please and fearing the Führer's temper, hesitates for only a fraction of a second. He knows the jet's aerodynamics are designed for high-speed interception, not heavy payloads. He knows that adding bomb racks will ruin its speed and maneuverability. But under the intense gaze of the dictator, he nods. Yes, my Führer. With some modifications, it can carry 1,000 kilograms. Hitler's face transforms. The awe vanishes, replaced by a terrifying, delusional clarity. He begins to shout, his gestures wild, pointing at the sleek fighter that was meant to reclaim the German skies. "This is not a fighter," Hitler bellows, his voice echoing across the tarmac. "I don't care about the fighter, I want the fast bomber. This is my Blitz bomber." In that single, frantic moment of madness, the fate of the Luftwaffe was sealed. Hitler didn't want a shield to protect his people. He wanted a spear to strike back at London. But as the jet engines cooled on the runway, a shadow began to fall over the project. A shadow of delays, technical failures, and a decision so catastrophic it would leave the Angel grounded while the Reich burned. The silence that followed Hitler's proclamation at Lechfeld was deafening. General Adolf Hitler, a man who had survived hundreds of dogfights, felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He looked at the Me 262, this sleek, aerodynamic marvel, and envisioned it being weighed down by heavy, drag-inducing bombs. It was like hitching a plow to a thoroughbred racehorse. "My Führer," Galland attempted to intervene, his voice steady despite the tension. "To use this aircraft as a bomber is to throw away its greatest advantage. Its speed is its defense. Its cannons are its purpose. We need it to stop the thousands of bombers pouring over our borders." But Hitler wasn't listening. He was pacing now, lost in a fever dream of Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons. In his mind, the Me 262 wasn't a tool for survival. It was a tool for terror. He ordered that the aircraft be redesigned immediately. It was no longer the Me 262 fighter. It was the Sturmvogel, the Storm Bird. The technical reality was a nightmare. The Me 262's Jumo 004 engines were already temperamental masterpieces of engineering. They were built using starvation alloys because Germany was running out of high-grade metals like nickel and chromium. These engines had a lifespan of barely 25 hours before they needed a complete overhaul. Now, Messerschmitt's engineers were being forced to bolt external bomb racks onto the fuselage, shattering the plane's delicate center of gravity. While the engineers struggled with these impossible modifications, the Allies weren't sitting idle. They knew something was coming. Intelligence reports were filled with strange sightings and engines without propellers. In the high-altitude theaters of war, the American 8th Air Force was suffering. Even though the jet wasn't yet deployed in mass, the mere rumor of its existence sent ripples of anxiety through bomber crews. Imagine being a tail gunner in a B-17. You are shivering in 40-degree temperatures, surrounded by the smell of cordite and hydraulic fluid. You look out into the void, and you see a speck. Within seconds, not minutes, that speck is a screaming shadow that rips through your formation, its 30mm shells turning the flying fortress next to you into a fireball. You can't even lead your sights fast enough to track it. It is a ghost. By late 1943, Galland and the Luftwaffe leadership were desperate. They attempted a quiet rebellion. They continued to test the Me 262 as a fighter in secret, hoping that a series of spectacular successes would convince Hitler to change his mind. They saw the potential. A single Me 262 could dive through an Allied formation, fire its rockets, and be miles away before the escorting P-51 Mustangs could even turn their wings. However, Hitler's spies were everywhere. When he discovered that the production lines were still prioritizing the fighter version over his Blitz bomber, his fury was legendary. He ordered a total freeze on the fighter program. Every single Me 262 rolling off the line had to be a bomber. This decision didn't just delay the jet, it crippled it. The added weight of the bombs made the aircraft sluggish during takeoff, the exact moment it was most vulnerable. Allied intelligence soon caught on. They didn't need to fight the jet in the air. They just needed to wait for it to land or take off. Rat catching, they called it. As 1944 dawned, the Allied invasion of Normandy was looming. The German air defense was crumbling. The Me 262 could have cleared the skies over the beaches of France, making D-Day a bloodbath beyond imagining. But instead, the world's first jet fighter was sitting in hangars, being fitted with bomb sights that didn't work and racks that the engines couldn't support. The Angel was being chained to the earth by the very man who claimed to be its champion. And as the first Allied boots hit the sand at Omaha Beach, the Me-262 was nowhere to be found. But the mistake didn't just save the Allies on D-Day. It set the stage for a dramatic showdown in the skies over Germany that would decide if the jet could ever reclaim its glory, or if it would go down in flames as history's greatest what if. By the summer of 1944, the sky over Germany has become a graveyard for the Luftwaffe. You look up from the ruins of Berlin or Hamburg, and you don't see the sun. You see the silver bellies of 1,000 B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators. The 1,000-bomber raids are no longer a threat. They are a daily, crushing reality. Finally, even Hitler cannot ignore the smoke rising from his capital. In a fit of desperate pragmatism, partially lifts the ban on the fighter version. But the delay has been catastrophic. While Germany spent a year trying to turn a scalpel into a sledgehammer, the Allies have perfected the art of mass production. For every Me-262 that finally rolls off the assembly line, hidden in secret forest factories to avoid Allied scouts, the Americans are producing 100 P-51 Mustangs. August 28, 1944. Over the Reich. Major Walter Nowotny, one of the most decorated aces in history, climbs into the cockpit of his Me-262. He doesn't have the luxury of a long runway. He's taking off from a strip of Autobahn highway hidden by trees. You can feel the heat radiating from the Jumo 004 engines. There is no propeller to pull you forward. It feels like an invisible hand is shoving you into the back of your seat. As the wheels leave the pavement, the world blurs. At 500 miles per hour, the Allied escort fighters, the Little Friends, look like they are standing still. Nowotny spots a formation of bombers. Usually, a German pilot has to carefully maneuver, check his 6 o'clock, and engage in a grueling dogfight. Not today. In the Me-262, you are a shark in a tank of goldfish. You close the distance so fast that the American waist gunners don't even have time to swing their .50 calibers. Thump, 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 thump. The 4 30mm Mk-108 cannons in the nose of the Me-262 bark. These aren't machine guns. They are short-barreled sledgehammers. A single hit can blow the wing off a heavy bomber. In seconds, 2 B-17s are spiraling toward the earth in flames. The Mustangs try to dive on Nowotny, but he simply pushes the throttle. He doesn't turn. He doesn't weave. He just outruns them. It was the ultimate proof of Gallen's vision. In the hands of an expert, the Me-262 was untouchable, but the Angel had a clipped wing. The engines, though revolutionary, were fragile. If a pilot moved the throttle too quickly, the engines would flame out, or worse, explode. And because Hitler had delayed the program to focus on the Blitzbomber role, the Luftwaffe lacked the one thing they needed most: trained jet pilots. Young, inexperienced green pilots were being shoved into these high-speed machines with only a few hours of training. To them, the Me-262 wasn't a savior. It was a death trap. And the Allies had found the Me-262's Achilles heel. Since the jet needed long, paved runways to reach its takeoff speed, the Americans simply stationed P-51s and P-47s near the known jet bases. They would sit high in the clouds, waiting. The moment they saw the heat shimmer of a jet landing, its fuel low, its speed dropping, its pilot exhausted, they would pounce. The Germans were forced to ring their airfields with hundreds of light anti-aircraft guns just to protect their super weapon while it touched the ground. The world's most advanced fighter was being hunted like a wounded animal every time it tried to come home. By the end of 1944, Adolf Galland was removed from his command for criticizing the High Command's failures. But in a final, defiant act, he was allowed to form JV-44, the Squadron of Experts. It was a unit made up entirely of the Reich's top aces, men with dozens, even hundreds of kills. They were given the Me 262 and told to do the impossible, win the war alone. They called themselves the Ley Mallory of the air, a final brotherhood of knights in machines of the future. But as they took to the skies for the final defense of Germany, they realized Hitler's Blitz bomber mistake hadn't just cost them time. It had cost them the very air they breathed. The Americans were no longer just bombing factories. They were closing in on the airfields. The final battle for the Me 262 wasn't going to be fought at 30,000 feet. It was going to be a desperate scramble for survival in the mud and the fire of a collapsing empire. March 18th, 1945. 11:00 a.m., over the skies of Brandenburg. The end of the world feels like a vibration in your teeth. You are looking through the gun camera of a Messerschmitt Me 262, and what you see is a wall of metal. It is the largest aerial armada ever assembled. 1,221 American bombers and 632 escort fighters, a silver carpet stretching from horizon to horizon. Against this tidal wave, the Luftwaffe sends up 37 jets. It is the Me 262's greatest performance and its final tragedy. Among the pilots is General Adolf Galland himself, leading his squadron of experts. You push the throttles forward. The engines scream. You aren't just flying a plane, you are piloting a lightning bolt. You dive through the escort screen at such speed that the Mustang pilots can only watch in helpless frustration as you tear into the bomber boxes. In that single engagement, the jets down 12 bombers and 1 fighter. It is a stunning display of local air superiority. But as you pull away, your fuel gauge flickering near empty, you look back. The 1,200 remaining bombers are still there. They haven't even flinched. They continue their steady, rhythmic crawl toward Berlin. The mistake Hitler made back in 1943 had finally come full circle. Historians often speculate, what if those 1,400 Me 262s produced had been available as pure fighters a year earlier? What if the Blitz bomber delay hadn't pushed mass production into 1945, when Germany's fuel reserves were dry and its best pilots were already in the ground? The answer is chilling. If the Me 262 had been deployed in force in 1944, the Allied daylight bombing campaign might have become so costly it would have been forced to stop. Without air supremacy, D-Day would have been a gamble that General Eisenhower might not have taken. The war in Europe could have dragged on for years, potentially ending only with the flash of an atomic bomb over a German city instead of a Japanese one. But as the Soviet tanks rolled into Berlin and the Americans captured the jet base at Hof, the Me 262's journey didn't end. It just changed sides. American and British engineers were horrified and mesmerized when they finally got their hands on the intact Stormbirds. They saw the swept-back wings, a concept they hadn't yet mastered. They saw the axial flow jet engines. Under Operation Paperclip, the technology and the scientists who built it were whisked away to the United States and the USSR. The Me 262 didn't win the war for Hitler, but it built the world that followed. The American F-86 Sabre and the Soviet MiG-15, the titans of the Korean War, both carry the DNA of that silver ghost that Ronald saw over France in 1943. Hitler wanted a fast bomber to satisfy his ego, but in doing so, he crippled the only weapon that could have protected his Reich. He saw the future, but his obsession with the past prevented him from using it. As the sun set on May 8, 1945, the remaining Me-262s sat silent on their runways, out of fuel and out of time. The Angel had been grounded by a madman's pride, leaving behind only the haunting wail of its engines in the memories of those who flew against it, and the realization that the world had narrowly escaped a much darker timeline. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the Me-262 and the strategic blunder that changed history. If you enjoyed this cinematic journey through World War II records, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more immersive historical stories. What do you think? If Hitler had listened to his generals and used the Me-262 as a fighter from day one, could Germany have won the air war? Let us know your theories in the comments below.